director. He is not here this evening. He is coming from the private industry. He was a 10-year director for NTPA for those families in the area. That's our area musical theater learning center. He will be our theater director at middle school, and this is his first year to teach. Patrick Hayes is with us this evening, I believe. There you are. He is going to serve as our middle school choir director and also help us out with sixth grade choir this year. This is going to be his second year teaching, and he comes to us from Wiley, having finished his degree at A&M Commerce. Cynthia Tucker is in the audience. She is going to be at Sloan Creek Intermediate School, serving as one of our band directors. She comes to us with 26 years of experience in the band world. She has been in both Wiley and Frisco ISD, and she graduated from New Mexico State with a master's at A&M Commerce. Welcome. I've seen Alicia make it over from the Creek yet. At Sloan Creek, she is going to be our art teacher. She's had 9 years of experience in teaching art. Incredible background in her art education coming from Buffalo State College. And so welcome, Alicia, if you happen to catch us online. Rebecca Lacey is here. She is going to be our new art teacher at Hart Elementary. She has 5 years of teaching experience, most recently having been in Virginia at Hampton City Schools, and her background in education is from UNT. Congratulations, we're happy to have you. Last but certainly not least, we are so fortunate to have a former employee come back after a year break. Brooke Grawl is going to be joining us in elementary music as our specialist at Puster. She has 12 years of experience in music education and earned her degree from UNT. We're so happy to have you back, Brooke.
All these UNT people.
Don't forget your apples. Those are really good. I'm Chris Ross. I'm the athletic director. And I'm going to introduce all of our coach hires. We'll start with the high school. We have Michael Collins, and this is his 12th year, and he's going to be business teacher and coach from UT Tyler. Okay, we have Brooke Donovan. She's going to be teaching science, her 8th year, UNT, and she is our new head girls golf coach. Travis Hollum, 10 years, University of Denver, and our new girls basketball coach. Those are the best shoes in the building right there. All right? Those are like happy shoes, right? Okay. Then we have Tasha Hollum, his wife. There we go. And she's going to be helping us in the high school on the girls' side, teaching English, and it's her 10th year from OBU. Caleb Reynolds be teaching history and coaching football and baseball. It's his 6th year from ULM. Ashton Ritchie will be at the high school working with volleyball and basketball, teaching history. It's her 2nd year from Houston Baptist. Brad Wicks is our new tennis coach. He couldn't be here tonight, but I did want to introduce him. It's his 21st year. He's from Angelo State. Okay. Then we have Zach Ross, Boise State, 1st year. I'm fired up. I'll say that. Yeah, it's an awesome honor to get to coach with your son. So I'm very fortunate to do that. Yeah. At the middle school, James Boyd, 2nd year, UTEP. Chrissy Clewell, 9th year from UNT. I'm going to call some of these, they're at practice, many of them. I know y'all understand that. We have Taylor Davis, 7th year A&M Commerce. These are at the middle school. Glad you're here. That will be our girls coordinator, and she's already made a difference. Really appreciate what you're doing. Let me see here. Aubrey Lyon, 3rd year, BYU. Joey Miller will be our head boys basketball assistant. It's his 1st year. He's from DBU. We have Brett Whitehead will be at the middle school, 1st year from A&M Commerce. We have Sarah Cobbin. She is going to be our debate teacher and cheer coach, and this will be her 4th year from UTA. Glad you joined us. And then we have Randy Bollinger. It's his 1st year, and he is our new swim coach. So he's, I know, not here as well.
And before we get the picture, I want to let everybody know that we give our new hires a pen and a caramel apple. The pen is to symbolize you writing the next chapter of your professional story with us. And the apple is symbolic of the significant role of the teacher in our community.
Welcome. You bet. Welcome. All right, item 6, public comments related to August 8th agenda items.
Good evening. We have one public comment related to the agenda item. Her name is Lori Morrow regarding parental input on SHAC.
So Ms. Morrow, you signed the public comment procedures before you came in. But just want to remind that disruptive behavior will not be tolerated in the meeting. If after the provision of a single warning, the disruptive behavior continues, the disruptive individual may be escorted out of the meeting by district officials and/or law enforcement. It's a criminal offense for a person with intent to prevent or disrupt the lawful meeting to substantially obstruct or interfere with the ordinary conduct of the meeting by physical action or verbal utterance. You have 3 minutes to speak. We won't respond.
That's great. Thank you. Hello, trustees. With regard to the incredible responsibility and influence that SHAC has in choosing a health curriculum for Lovejoy students, I'd like the public record to reflect that Texas Education Code 28.004 requires the SHAC to choose curriculum consistent with community values, of which parental input is a vital part. When I reviewed the recommended instructional materials as they were made available earlier this spring, I found that there were trends among them which potentially conflict with many Lovejoy families. The first is that it encourages students to seek the advice of generic, nameless, trusted adults rather than parents on some very personal issues. And the second is that it uses gender non-specific words when gender-specific words would actually be correct, such as multiple references to the stages of embryonic development inside a pregnant person, rather than a pregnant woman or pregnant mother. Correctness counts if we're going to propel every person to personal excellence. Now, luckily, there exist other instructional materials to be reviewed by parents at esteemjourney.com. And these materials already conform to Texas TEKS. They do not require Lovejoy to write its own material. They insist on the primacy of the family as guidance givers, and they use correct gender language. In which case, I hope that parents will find the Esteem materials refreshingly appropriate, will recommend them to the SHAC, and that the board would approve them upon SHAC's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, item 7, consider and take possible action to approve a recommendation to issue a finding in accordance with TEC 21.105C2 and 19 TAC 249.14 parentheses 5 that good cause did not exist for Jessica Tullibus Hogendorn to abandon her employment contract and report the teacher to the State Board for Educator Certification. Ms. Koenig.
Yes, we've had, right now the job market and education, we're competing with a lot of people for teachers, and we're here in Lovejoy and we're here to serve students. And many of our teachers signed contracts back in the spring, and they have 45 days before the first day of instruction to not follow through with the contract or to seek resignation. And Ms. Tolbus Hogendorn turned in a resignation after that 45th day. The resignation date, the cutoff date was July 1st. We received a resignation July 6th. And the reason we're bringing this up is because, this is not meant to be punitive. We've had other resignations turned in, and if we can find a suitable replacement, we've let those people out of their contract. And then some people chose to stay because they realized that they had made a commitment to our kids and to our district and are serving. So it's really just to maintain that consistency for everyone and to be fair to everyone. So that's why we are recommending that the superintendent or her designee submit a written complaint to the State Board of Educator Certification with the finding that good cause did not exist for the teacher to abandon her contract according to Texas Education Code Section 21105C2 with the district.
We've heard the presentation. Any discussion? So efforts are ongoing.
Efforts are ongoing. We've interviewed many candidates. Ms. Matthews probably back there shaking her head. She's helping with the interview process and contacts. We offered the position to someone and they did not. We had someone take it and then go to another school district within pretty much 24 hours. They were interviewing that day and had someone else take the position. Ms. Hogendorn did recommend, send us a resume of someone. We interviewed them also and offered them the position, and they had already gone to another school district also. But we're going to continue to find a music teacher at Sloan Creek.
Okay. So you talked about this not being punitive. Can you explain a little bit more about exactly what it means? Is this something that
This
is going
teacher,
to keep this person
no,
from
this
seeking
would,
employment?
basically all we're doing is we're making a recommendation to SBEC that that's all we're doing. If you approve this, is we'll make a recommendation to SBEC, and then they would determine if a reprimand would go on the certificate. And on the certificate, the reprimand, the person can still teach this year. It would just say that they abandoned a contract for this year. And the climate, it's, every district needs teachers. And from what we know, this person is currently employed in another school district. So that's why we're, asking for this consideration. They would determine actually if the reprimand went, and they would consider all the mitigating factors.
I think it's important for us to be consistent with our policy and make sure that teachers, when they sign a contract, understand that we have to plan around that.
Right,
And the kids depend on them to be there. So
right. That's an important part of our job, yeah. I think everyone has reached out and contacted many other school districts, personnel, trying to find a suitable replacement.
I'll go forward, Barry.
Okay.
Knows. I move to authorize Ms. Cordell, Lovejoy ISD Superintendent or designee, to submit a written complaint to the State Board of Educator Certification with a finding that good cause did not exist pursuant to Section 21.105C2 for the Jessica Talbus Hogendorn to abandon her employment contract with the district.
So moved, Jason James. Second, Julie McLaughlin. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Item 8, consider an act on the 2022-2023 teacher appraisal calendar.
Yes, basically, I'm asking for the approval of teacher appraisal calendar for the 22-23 school year. I believe it's on page 14 of the board book. This is something basically that lets our teachers know what days, we can observe, when new teacher orientation occurs, when SLOs, student learning objectives, are to be done. It's basically a timeline to let them know. And so that's why I'm asking for approval for you to approve the teacher appraisal calendar. Yes, it's generally the same. The things that we look at is we want to give them plenty of time, like if they need improvement, or we also want to, if they need help in the classroom, so we can get in there and get observations done or evaluations. It's really a supportive mechanism, so we can provide support for them. One thing is you'll see, it will say on here, like we recommend that teachers don't be evaluate the day before or after a holiday. We know even, sometimes on coming back from winter break may not be the best time. Takes kids a little bit of time, a day or two to get settled back in. So, and, we want our teachers to know we're going to support that. We know that that's not a formal observation. They can still do a walkthrough, of course, administrators can, but not a formal observation there. Also, just so you know, like summatives for May 4th, those have to be done 3 weeks before the last day of instruction. That's just, guidelines in text education code. So that's what you see there. Other questions about the calendar? Okay, thank you.
Consider an act you'd like.
Yes, I'm making a recommendation to consider an act on approving the appraisal calendar.
I'll make a motion that we approve the appraisal calendar for the 2022-2023 school year.
So moved. Amy Smith. Second, Marvin Bobo. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank
Thank you.
you. Item 9, consider an act on TASB Risk Management Fund Program renewals.
Good evening. So we have before you an item to renew our TASB Risk Management Fund Insurance Program. Any purchase above $75,000 does need to come before the board for formal approval. And so this is comprised of our coverage for auto, cybersecurity, property, liability, workers' compensation, and unemployment compensation through the TASB Fund program. We are fortunate this year in that our contribution that TASB estimates that we will need to make to the fund for our services this year is actually about $8,000 less than it was last year. And so we are recommending that the board approve this renewal in compliance with our board policy.
Questions, comments, discussion?
We were very fortunate. Some of our neighboring districts had pretty substantial increases, but we did not this year. Good question.
So moved. So moved that we approve? Yep. Second, anyone? Second, Marvin Bobo. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Item 10, presentation on finance and tax rate update.
So since you had a bit of a reprieve in the month of July, we're going to bring before you another update in regard to finance and tax rates as we begin to look at the beginning of this school year and what we're required to do this month to adopt our final tax rate. So you'll see in front of you what we've been using as our framework for a lot of the work that we've been doing. And the word that we want to continue to use as we look at our mission and our 3 pillars is our commitments. So our commitments to maintaining the legacy of excellence that we have here in Lovejoy, preparing future ready students, and of course, maintaining financial sustainability. So we have a consistent pattern of being able to provide that to our students. We do want to share with you some financial projections. And so we reviewed some of this information in June when we were adopting the budget. But again, this is a 6-year financial baseline projection for our general fund. It does not include student nutrition, just 199 and 183. And so these items, if you'll look from, it provides a past year, current, and then future projection. And so a couple of the things that we've been discussing on these projections is what our annual net surplus or deficit may look like on an annual basis based on the assumptions that we've built into the model on the state funding formula, as well as what we see occurring with our enrollment, as well as our tax collections. So if you look at the first highlighted line, you'll see that our baseline projection, without any change to the current tax rate calculation, would show a deficit budget in fiscal year 26, if you look all the way out to the right, of over 2.1 million. And that would be the annual deficit in the budget for that particular year at that point in time. We also continue to review the days of operating expense that we have available to us to operate. By fiscal year 26, our projection indicates that we would be at 65 days of fund balance. If you'll recall, this year we started at 73 days, and we had a little bit of a concern in November about our ability to fund our payroll. And so we'll kind of talk about that in more detail again. But that baseline projection showing the 65 days of fund balance in fiscal year 26 is obviously what we've been looking at working towards building for a better financial future, because that would definitely be a problematic situation. Normally, you want to shoot for 90 days minimum of operating expenditures and then adjust that 90 days based on the cash flow of your particular district. For us, we're highly dependent on tax collections that primarily fund our school district operations. So it's even more important for us to have a healthy amount of days of operating expense in our fund balance to have continuity of operations. So this projection does include all the efficiency measures that we talked about that we implemented throughout the year and planning for the 22-23 budget. And we will detail some of those here in a moment. And it also did take into account an estimated 2% raise for each of those years. Yes, sir.
Remind me, there are no changes in operating expenses in the outer years. They're assuming any dollar for dollar increase is funded by a related cut.
Yeah, so on the expense side, we did incorporate the $300,000 in savings from zero-based budgeting this year. And other than that, there's no inflationary automation of expenditures throughout the rest of the projection. Mhm.
I think it's a good time. Can you talk about how, and I know you're going to get to it in future slides, but can you talk about slightly decreases enrollment or flat enrollment in the face of continued increased appraisal values of homes adds to recapture?
Yes, so you'll see in this slide the excess revenue recapture about halfway down the slide, about 3 rows up from the net surplus deficit line, and you'll see that number increasing pretty significantly. And the primary drivers behind that increase are decreasing even very slightly, but are decreasing enrollment and are increasing property values. So what that means is because the property values are increasing, we're collecting more in taxes while we're not serving quite as many students as we were before. So we're required to give more back to the state based on the state funding formula.
And you just conservatively assumed an 8% growth on appraisal?
That's correct.
Irregardless of what happens with enrollment. Recapture for us is based on values. We can only keep a certain amount of money per student based on our current tax rate.
That's right.
And to the extent values and or tax revenue exceeds that number, that is recapture.
That's correct.
Okay. I think people get very confused about what that means.
Mhm.
And it really is a function of values.
Mhm.
It has less to do with what we're doing. To the extent we can control it with a tax rate, we can increase the amount we keep here and the amount that's collected. But recapture is going to be what it's going to be based on valuations.
That's exactly right. So this projection is based on all of the same assumptions that I just mentioned, but adds 3.17 cents to our M&O tax rate that is still available to the district to utilize if a VATRE were passed. And so if you look at that change in the net surplus or deficit highlighted yellow line, you'll see that we still do end up with a slight deficit budget by fiscal year 26, but it's not near as dramatic at 1.5 million. The big number that we're looking at is the days of operating expense and fund balance. And even with everything, assuming that we kept all of those assumptions the same, made no other changes, we would still end fiscal year 26 with 80 days of operating expense and fund balance, which means we don't have, a payroll hardship at that point. We're still financially solvent and capable of making all of our payments without having to take on a loan or anything like that.
And to clarify, at 70 days, we're taking on a loan.
Right. Yes, sir.
And we were at 73 or 74 going into our November payroll this last year, prior to us putting money back into fund balance at the end of the year.
Yes, we were very close last year. And of course, a lot of factors will play into that as the exact number of days each year that it would take before you would have to get a loan. But we were definitely reviewing our tax collections on a daily basis last year and kind of planning a what if scenario we kind of already had in place if it was necessary to pull that trigger. Unfortunately, we made it out without having to do that.
I know I ask this every time, and I think you're going to say it again later, but can you explain again why in November there is that gap when we don't have the funds for payroll?
Yes. So we start our fiscal year. Obviously, we just had convocation. Kids are coming back on Monday. So we're seeing all of our most significant expenses starting at right about now. So we're starting to pay our staff. We're starting to purchase supplies for the year. But because most of our revenue comes from local collections, most of y'all probably don't pay your tax bill early, probably not in August. So a lot of folks are paying their bills in December, January timeframe. We really don't start to see any significant collections until November. So we're having to float from August to November and make sure we have enough cash on hand to operate during that time period while we're waiting on those larger tax collections to come in.
So clarify for me the funding from the state and the timing of which we received that from. Have we received the state funding from last year? Have they trued up with us yet?
We have not had our final settle up. It takes several months after the year closes. So we won't have near final settle up till September, October, and know where we're finally at. We do receive some state revenue payments throughout the year, but
They
that's
haven't
when
paid us
settle
everything they
happens.
owed us from last year. We're going into this year paying the expenses for this
Right.
year.
If they owe us more for last year, we haven't yet received
That's
it.
also a factor.
Mhm. So I did want to just kind of go back a few years and talk about one of the drivers of the state funding formula primarily is ADA or attendance. And of course, a major driver of attendance is our enrollment because they can't be here in the classroom if they're not enrolled. So this is a revisit of the January 2020 demographic projection that was provided to the district from PASA, who was a demographer at the time. And I just wanted to kind of draw your attention to a couple numbers that we can use as a comparison. But during planning at that time, for 2023-24, the projected moderate enrollment was 4,664, if you kind of see that number right in the middle of the projection. As you know, several things have changed since 2020. So this is our most recent demographic projection that was completed about January of 22, just a few months ago. And if you'll look at our 23-24 demographic projection, they're kind of sort of in the middle. For that same year, it's 4,320. So because that's a major driver and you're looking at 340 or so students of difference in enrollment, that obviously has a significant impact on the revenue the district receives. At the same time, of course, we're a smaller district and a lot of the costs that we have are fixed costs. So if you lose, 20 students in one campus, you may not really be able to cut any teachers or any, it's not always that we lose all of those students in a specific area where we can trigger a lot of changes at once. But again, that change has a significant impact on the revenue the district receives. So we wanted to also take a moment to talk about the financial sustainability measures that we've been working on for the past year and what we continue to work on moving forward. And I wanted to highlight several things here. The first being the Financial Sustainability Committee. And I think we have several representatives here this evening. Thank you for coming. Already starting the year off strong. We had 40 members from the community who participated in this stakeholder group. And it was intensive. There was a lot of meeting monthly from, I believe we started in December and ended in May. Identified a lot of work that we could do in four different focus areas. And I'll detail some of that here in a moment. But that really was a driving force behind a lot of the work that we did in the past year of identifying what could be done, what are the things that we want to consider, and what do we want to do as a community to provide that financial sustainability. There was the development of strategic targets and strategies, and I'll share a brief snippet of some of that with you. We also did zero-based budgeting for the first time, so that was a lot of work for our campuses and department heads. They did an amazing job. I was really pleased with the work that we did. They identified the things that they were leading for in their areas and allocated their budgets accordingly. And we were able to cut about $300,000 from our non-payroll budget, which is pretty significant from that area. So hats off to those folks. It was really, really good work. And then there were a number of other efficiency and revenue generation measures that we implemented last year. We did implement $1.3 million of staffing efficiency savings, which is pretty phenomenal considering we did not enact a reduction in force. We simply looked at ways to become more efficient with how we staff and what we do. $610,000 of that $1.3 million came out of the red building. So we definitely tried to make sure we were looking at every possible way to be more efficient without impacting our legacy of excellence. We also reinstated the tuition-based Lovejoy Scholar Program. And I'm glad to say thank you for taking all those applications in, Anna. We're looking at even a really good benefit from that of about $772,000 based on that program this year. We've had quite a bit of enrollment interest, so we're very pleased with the results of that. We also conducted a property value study audit and submitted an appeal, received a check this summer for about $86,000. So it's the first time the district has conducted an appeal. And so we plan to continue to do that, see if we can continue that process. We did have a reduction in overtime, kind of redid the way we do graduation. That saved $40,000, did some power factor correction. We'll complete that before school starts. And so we should save about $12,000 of that a year out of our utilities. We did have several things that were special things you might have seen happening this summer. The sale of unused portables and some of our salvage items. We got about $87,000 and are continuing to look at any other items that are no longer used that could be reallocated for auction. We had $38,000 in turf installation savings from irrigation. Also, we've talked a little bit about ESSER, and we did receive a small amount allocated over 2.5 years of $2.2 million. So we're still in the process of submitting those expenditures, and $1.1 million in child care relief funding. There were also several other grants that were worked on, school health grant, dyslexia, autism. There are a lot of folks around this table who helped work on a lot of that to make sure that if there was a possibility to get any grant funding out there, that the district was seeking that, those avenues. And the last item was financial forecasting. So a lot of time was spent kind of looking at some of the things we need to evaluate because they drive so much of our financial picture. So those include things like our demographic projections, which we just shared, looking at our capacity of our facilities, developing a long-term financial forecast so we can kind of see in future years what that looks like. So these are the type of items that we've been working on for the past year. And I wanted to share a picture of the Financial Sustainability Committee. Those folks, I know it's kind of small, so you probably can't see them. But if you see any of these people out there, definitely thank them for their work last year. It was really quite incredible. The avenues that they looked at for recommendations for financial sustainability were in these 4 categories. And these categories were derived from a lot of collaborative work around the items that everybody wanted to look at, what could we do, and then putting this together. So those 4 areas were revenue generation, efficiency measures, program analysis, and legacy of excellence. And so there were a number of items under each of these categories that were considered. And then strategic targets were created with strategies and key indicators for each of those 4 areas. And so this is just a snapshot of the revenue generation view and the strategies that were selected under there. So as you can see at the top, consider a VA-TRE as a means to facilitate financial sustainability was one of those strategies. In fact, the first one, and there were a lot of other strategies discussed, but recognizing the amount of revenue that could be generated from this strategy was definitely a large part of the conversation. So in regard to our financial priorities, way back in November, we had a lot of discussion about what the priorities of the district were. And really these 2 things continued to come up, whether it was in the board budget workshop and the financial sustainability committee, all the work to kind of drive and focus what we were doing. The goals were employee compensation to make sure we could maintain our legacy of excellence and to restore fund balance so we could achieve that financial sustainability. So those two priorities continue to drive the work of what we're doing. We did do a compensation assessment last year. You may remember me discussing that. And while that compensation assessment at the time indicated that we were pretty competitive, you probably know that a lot has occurred since last year in regard to trying to find teachers. And so a lot of districts who've had opportunity because of excess revenue they had in the district to increase their teacher compensation or provide bonuses did so. So this is actually pulled from district websites for this current year's teacher compensation in 5-year experience increments. So unfortunately, we did not maintain the same position that we've had in the past in that area. So again, it's just something we want to bring attention to and be aware of as we look at different data points and what our goals are. In terms of the budget impact of increases, this chart shows you how much it costs a district to increase pay for all staff members or teachers, librarians, and nurses in red across different percentages. So at 1%, we're looking at about $322,000 to provide that type of increase for all staff. At 2%, we're looking at $644,000. 3% is almost $1 million. So obviously, these are pretty significant impacts to the budget.
Right, or because you're having a compounded, I guess, over
Right.
that amount of time. And the projections that we've already seen are at the 2% raise in the outer years.
That's
Right.
correct.
Which I think we can see that we are trending lower versus our peer districts. And so even a 2% raise is probably not, have you seen where that would move us up in the rankings?
So the 2% is in this figure for the 22-23 comparison. So it obviously doing the 2% as opposed to your point, a 3, 4, or 5% or a bonus structure dropped us already in that ranking. And so definitely something we just kind of want to look at and be aware of as we look at the future. So this chart is representing historically what our trend has been for fund balance since we kind of discussed the meaning of this earlier. If you look at from 2016 to 2021, the percentage of revenue or expenses that has been represented by the amount of money we have in fund balance continues to decrease. And we, of course, that was through 2021. And so that is obviously a trend that we need to make sure that we're not continuing. To the earlier discussion on the timing of cash flows and fund balance, this is just a snip from back in November when we were looking at being at 11 days potentially of cash on hand and kind of watching those collections very closely throughout the month of November. And the dark blue line represents the beginning of the month cash balance to the end of the month cash balance. So that really low red line dip in November was the panic moment, but we were able to recover, but you can see kind of how close it got. And then this is our cash flow projection for the current year. So we're projecting in November our low point to be at about 29 days. So that's definitely progress. But definitely, you know, you're going to see fluctuations from month to month and how a school district operates in terms of what their cash flow is, but you want to average out at, you know, about 90 days. So those again are areas we want to continue to monitor and work towards improving. And so this chart represents the projected days of operating expense and fund balance dependent on fiscal year from top to bottom. 21 has obviously already occurred all the way through fiscal year 26. The gray bar represents what our current projection is. The red bar represents what it would be with the VATRE. So again, kind of taking that yellow highlighted row that we discussed before and displaying that here. So you might be able to kind of get a picture more clearly. So as we've reviewed all this information and discussed and adopted the budget and started to look at our proposed tax rate, the consideration of a VATRE becomes a part of this discussion. So we did review some information earlier this year about how do districts generate additional funding? So the option is to increase the tax rate by passing a voter approval tax rate election. We are in an environment where a lot of districts are considering this. We can proceed under a disaster declaration, which the state is currently still under, which just basically expedites the process without having to do additional audits and things like that. So the districts that want to consider this as an avenue to generate more revenue will adopt their budget and tax rate, are required to file for an election in August and hold that election on the uniform election date, which of course this year is November 8th. So this again is a representation of the general fund net surplus or deficit on an annual basis. And again, this is showing with or without the VA TRE just a little more clearly and looking at the difference in all the way out to fiscal year 26. And to give you a breakdown to really kind of understand where our revenue is coming from and what our expenditures are spent on, this is our current source and use of funds breakdown. So on the left side, you'll see a pie chart, and this is breaking down the tax rate into cents per source of fund. So you'll see that 97 cents is coming from the property tax collection, large majority of our revenue source. The second largest at 16 cents is the state FSP, and then at 15 cents, tuition fees and other local activities. So what that says to me, we're doing a lot of work around trying to generate as much as we can locally. But the use of funds side on the right will also show you a breakdown of where those expenditures are going. Again, the largest part is instruction and related services. You'll see that in blue at the 81 cents. The next largest is the 18 cents, which is your intergovernmental charges. That's going to include things like recapture and other services. Your 17 cents is your student support services. So that's going to include things like ed diags, LSSP, nursing, transportation, athletics, student nutrition, those types of things. And so that gives you kind of the further breakdown of where the funds are being used. This chart shows you a lot of information about our future projections going from 21 on out to 26. And the dark green bar that you see is our current tax collections. The light green bar is how much more we could collect with a VA TRE. The red bar you'll see on top of the light green bar is our recapture currently. And then that tiny, tiny pink bar at the top, if you can see that, it is the increase in recapture as a result of the VA TRE. So a very small amount compared to the increase in the actual collections. One of the important things to note with this chart, to the comment earlier, is that while your property values are projected to continue to increase, that's the black line, you see that continuing to go up, that green bar really doesn't go up much. So that's kind of what we were talking about with the formula as it relates to property values and enrollment. In regard to the 22 tax rate, for last year, the M&O tax rate was $1.0050. Our INS rate was at 50 cents for a total tax rate of $1.5050. Our 2022-23 recommended tax rate is at 97.46 in the M&O side, and then 50 cents again on the INS tax rate for a total of $1.4746. So the tax rate that we're bringing forward this evening is actually a 3.04 cent decrease from last year. This also represents the lowest tax rate that Lovejoy ISD has had in the past 20 years.
And this is after the TRE increase, right?
That's correct.
You go back to the previous slide for a minute. I want to spend a minute talking about that and just unpack the assumptions there.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest source of confusion that I hear amongst folks that I speak to or that ask me questions are around recapture, property taxes, and funding of the district. So just clarify for me that the correlation between taxes, tax values, tax collections, and funding to the district today.
So on the ISD side of your tax bill, your property values are going to go up a certain amount, that's going to increase the total bill regardless. The amount the district collects of that is obviously going to be somewhat dependent on, well, what we maintain would be somewhat dependent on our enrollment compared to that property value growth. So if the enrollment's not increasing at that same rate, we're sending more back in recapture. And it's strictly a result of the formula.
So regardless of what taxes do, we have an enrollment of X students. Those X students are going to generate X revenue to this district from tax collections. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That number will not change regardless of what tax values do.
The amount, right, the amount that the funding formula allows us to have based on the basic allotment
So
is
the
the
point I
same.
wanted to make is the tax values have zero to do with funding this district. What has to do with funding this district is the number of students sitting in seats and the rate at which we choose to fund this district at, by which we choose to elect or adopt. That's what drives the revenue to the district, not values, not the cost of your
Yes.
tax bill.
That's absolutely correct.
And recapture is the excess of whatever that rate we adopt allows and the gross receipts collected by the tax collector.
Yes.
Thank you.
So to further kind of break down the historical tax rate, this shows you from 2016 to 2021, the breakdown of the M&O rate and the INS rate. It's gone down about 10% from 2016 to 2021. And so by increasing the M&O tax rate, the remaining 3.17 cents that we have available to us would increase our revenue by about $775,000. Recapture would be slightly increased by about $135,000 netting. Last year, it would have netted us $640,000 more in revenue. We're estimating this year it'd be a little bit over $760,000 because, again, it is dependent on enrollment. We are very close with our demographic projections this year. Of course, we won't know till that final first day of school next Monday or really closer to October snapshot. But we're looking good this year. So it'd probably be closer to, $760,000, $800,000 this year. Further, if the state would choose to increase the basic allotment, which we would sure like if they would do, we would actually get even more revenue from the added cents.
Explain why these additional 3.17 cents are subject to recapture, whereas in some of others, it's not?
Yes. So the MCR or M&O portion of the tax rate that's set with our help from the state is broken down further up. That's your tier 1 rate. And then the tier 2 rate is your locally elected option to add cents on top of that rate. So the first type of pennies that you can add to your tax rate as a local community are your golden pennies. And you have, I believe, 8 cents of golden pennies that you can go after. And then after you've achieved those golden pennies, you can go after additional copper pennies. The golden pennies are not subject to recapture. So some districts have not yet gone forward to ask for those extra pennies. So if they haven't, if they're going for the golden pennies, they're not subject to recapture. The copper pennies are. And so we'll also show you here in a little bit some of the reasons for that difference and why some districts are still probably have available golden pennies and some don't.
And on those copper pennies, roughly the amount that we get to keep versus the additional recapture that we generate is roughly 80-20.
Right.
20% of the 3.17 will be recaptured versus turned here.
And so this is a breakdown of your recapture on the rate with or without a VATRE. As you can see, the percentage difference isn't very significant. It stays at about 3%, again, because we've just discussed the drivers of that recapture aren't necessarily, they're not the additional copper pennies. The drivers of that recapture are the values in the enrollment. So in looking at a potential VATRE, option number 1 would be if the VATRE were approved by the taxpayers, the rate would be $1.4746. That is a decrease from this year's tax rate. This 21 tax rate was $1.5050. And then if option 2, if the voters did not approve a VATRE or if it did not go before the voters, the rate would be $1.4429. So both options are going to reduce the tax rate either way. And then, of course, option one would generate the additional revenue we've been talking about of, 640 to 700 to 800,000, depending on enrollment. So just to give kind of a relative example of the impacts on an average homeowner in Lovejoy ISD, the average taxable home value is $675,420 after your exemptions. So on the tax bill for 2022 compared to prior year 2021 for that average size value, the increase in property values would be about $751. The savings with the homestead exemption increase that was approved by the voters in May that went from $25,000 for the homestead exemption to $40,000 would save about $221 a year, while the impact of a VATRE would only be about $201 per year. So just to give you an idea of the relative impact of some of those things. And this chart is provided just to provide you kind of a few different examples. We talked about the first column. The second column would be a home value of $1.5 million. The annual tax bill there would be $21,529, and the VATRE impacts component of that would be $463. For a home that's $2.5 million, the annual ISD portion of the tax bill is about $36,275, with only $780 of that being a result of the VATRE. Yes.
Not real estate value.
Yes, that's correct. And then the very last column is just using another example. If we had a taxpayer in the community who was over 65, of course, their values have been frozen for some time potentially. So if they were looking at a value of say $400,000, their tax bill may be $5,194 and of course would not be impacted. So again, the tax rate would decrease even with the VATRE, but that gives you an idea of the different potential impacts of different, those different levers on the tax bill.
You have your taxes frozen, you have that type of exemption. The VATRE does not impact your tax bill.
That's correct.
$0.
That's correct. And so we've provided just some comparison data here. We know several other districts, even on this chart, have done VATREs recently, but this gives you an idea of there are a lot of things that make Lovejoy special. One of those is that we don't have a lot of commercial property. So this shows you the property values per student in each of these districts. So you can see that our community does not have a lot of commercial property value, so our values per student are a bit lower. In communities where your property value per student is a bit lower, you're typically going to see a higher tax rate to be able to generate the amount of money that it takes to operate the district. And so this is a similar slide showing the tax collections that the district has received per student for each of these districts based on debt service and M&O. So you can kind of see the same trends there in terms of the amount collected per student. And last but not least, ESSER funds. So you've probably heard, if you've heard much about Lovejoy ISD finances, us talk about the fact that a lot of other districts receive much more in ESSER funding than we did because it was largely driven by the amount of economically disadvantaged students in the district. Because of our low proportion of economically disadvantaged students, we did not receive much in ESSER funding. So in Lovejoy, we received $516 per student, and you can see the comparison districts around us, many of whom have gone after compensation increases for their teachers and things like that based on the availability of some of that funding. So in summary, several of the items that we've talked about why a VATRE would be called potentially would be just a proactive financial strategy around where we're going long-term, not kind of doing the year to year and being surprised. The second would be protect and fund our legacy of excellence. We had convocation this morning and it was amazing watching all the student groups come in and perform. It was just wonderful. And to be able to see that really kind of inspires you in regard to what our students accomplish and our desire to continue to support those things. The third is employee compensation. Obviously, that's a huge part of continuing to provide that, restoring the fund balance for financial sustainability, and preserving the Lovejoy experience for students and parents. And last but not least, we don't really know what inflation is going to look like for sure in future years. So an added ability to withstand some of those things that could occur. So again, here's some pictures. I wish I had some pictures from this morning, but I'm not that fast. Also credit to the Red Ledger for some of these pictures. They do a really good job of taking pictures. But our students do some pretty amazing things. So you can see on the left, if a VA TRE passes, it does give us that additional revenue to help address those two primary priorities of employee compensation and restoring the fund balance. If a VA TRE is not called and passed, we'll have to look at some further reductions to get to that point where our projections support the continuing work that's being done. So that could be in the way of reducing either people or programs or increasing fees or class sizes. So those are kind of the other options we would have available to us if that wasn't done via a VA TRE. So just in summary on the tax rate information, again, the 21 tax rate was $1.50. In June, when we adopted the budget, we shared with you a highest possible potential tax rate of $1.5367, but what we're proposing this evening is $1.4746. Of course, that reflects the compression that we have available to us in 22. The homestead exemption, of course, is on your value side, not on the rate side. And of course, this does include that 3.17 cents. In terms of timeline, we have already adopted the budget. So in August, we formally adopt our tax rate and districts will consider whether or not they want to call a VA TRE. And in the future, we would post additional information. And then again, the uniform election date is November 8th. So at this time, I'd be glad to ask or answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for asking them throughout and not holding them until the end.
I think it's pretty, I mean, some of the things I'm thinking about is I think it was a very detailed presentation. Thank you for all the information. Increasing the fund balance and setting us up to competitively pay our teachers, we've talked about as being priorities for a long time. And we're trying to get fund balance not only back to the 90-day, but we're ultimately trying to get it to 120 days to get it to a sustainable place. I don't see any possible way. I mean, I've been vocal about not always trusting the projections of demographics and all the uncertainty that we've faced over the last couple of years. I'll be interested to see what the next demographic study says, but in any scenario, if we want to get to 120 days and stay competitive with our teachers, we've got to look at every possible revenue source we have available, and this is available to us. I think it's imperative, and we're still going to be facing hard choices about possible fees and possible reductions to programs to get to where we need to be. But every stone has to be uncovered. And this is one of those things that I think to stay where we want to be is an area that the community needs to help us.
I noted the value of the yield we would get from the VA TRE is almost exactly the 2%, a little over the 2% staff raise. And so Jason, to your point, like where else is that going to come from? And if our goal is truly to compensate our teachers. Yeah.
Like we're still going to have other
exactly.
hard choices in front of us.
I mean, ideally, 2% is not really where the market is going.
And we're not even factoring in any inflation on expenses where there's.
So we've gone through a process here that's been pretty deliberate to restore the financial health of the district. And I think we've done a good job overturning every component of the district, starting from square one. So I'm not one to want to pay more taxes. I own a lot of real estate here. And it certainly is, being in the real estate business is not popular, but at the same time, there's a philosophical reason not to do it, but there's also a factual reason to consider this. And I think the facts are, we have done a really good job looking at this district as a whole and every component of it, financially and culturally. And we have been able to extrapolate and turn a budget that we passed that was break even or negative to a positive, and to be able to put money in the fund balance with what we've done. So the stewardship of our resources that we currently have has been, I think, excellent. I did not appreciate the reactive stance that we've had to take in past times as a board, and I didn't appreciate being put in that position. And I think we have an opportunity to be proactive, and I think we have an obligation to be proactive, to be able to move forward in a way that allows us to have choices. And one of those choices is to protect the legacy of Lovejoy and the investment that we're making. And I think certainly the opposition would be more philosophical than factual. People move here. I looked it up today, and I knew the numbers were big, but I didn't know they were this big. So the same home in Allen that someone would buy here locally in one neighborhood, the one surrounding right here, would be about $618,000. This is real data pulled from Netris as of today, over the past 90 days. And in Lovejoy, they're going to pay $871,000 for that house. It's $260,000 more they think it's worth to put their kids in Lovejoy than they do to send them to Allen. And if we're not going to spend $400 a year, $300 a year to invest in that, to protect that, and to trend our ability to compensate our teachers in a good way, I'm not sure I would agree with that argument. I don't think most taxpayers are consciously going to spend $270,000 more on a house and object to funding our teachers and or our operations and our legacy at $400 a year. That same kind of analysis I looked at on 1 acre property, which we don't even have a ton of that left. Most of the new development's 2 acres. You're going to buy a property in Allen at 1 acre. You're going to pay about $1.2 million for it. In Lovejoy, you're going to pay $2.1. And that's over the past 90 days. It's real deals that have closed. That's a 70% increase in price. So they're willing to pay $1.1 million more for a house here than they would in Allen. And I think ultimately, I think if you look at the facts, there's an opportunity for us to do some good work here. And a piece of that, just a small piece of that, is the taxes. We're going to have to do other things. The other thing that's been asked of me that I wanted to unpack the mentality on is, why not charge fees, athletic fees or fees of some sort? And I think philosophically speaking, when you want to allocate revenue and expenses, you want them to be from the same types of sources. We don't want to charge a gas tax and then send it over here to pay for X. We don't want to charge athletic fees or extracurricular fees to fund the foundational operations of our district, which are our teachers and our ability to support our fund balance, to pay the light bill, to cash flow the district. Those two don't match. Now, I'll grant you fees would be efficient in the form of, we wouldn't have this 20% recapture that'll be added because it's copper penny. However, putting the burden on 70% of our students, don't quote me, that's not a hard number, but it's close. 70% of our students are in athletics and fine arts. To fund the obligations of 100% of the district, I have a problem with that. I think it's an obligation to all the taxpayers to support the core functions of financing our district by paying our teachers and augmenting fund balance, in addition to the other things we've already done. So the other thing I don't want to do is disincentivize kids who want to participate in athletics, fine arts, or extracurriculars, and have that money not go to support their efforts in whatever they're doing. Would we eventually need to charge some kinds of fees in those places? Perhaps we would, perhaps we wouldn't. Couldn't say that today. But the fee piece of it is a challenge for me at this level. And I think having the work done by the Financial Sustainability Committee and having the administration look at it, and then us looking at it from all these different lenses that have been able to view the finances of the district, it seems fairly fundamental that in this circumstance, albeit philosophically, I'm not a tax and spend kind of guy, we need to look at our tax rate, and we need to look at increasing it so that we can bring in more revenue to the district. There's not much left to cut. The efficiencies that have been done by our administration and our staff are, quite frankly, well beyond what our previous administration told us we could do. And in fact, they told us we couldn't do it. So I am excited about the work we've done, but I'm excited about the work we're going to do. And I would say this, we are going to cash flow this district, and we are going to pay our teachers one way or another. So it's whether or not we have to make these other cuts that are necessary to accomplish this, or if we're going to take the steps we've taken and step up the ladder another run. Either we take a step back or we take a step forward. And I think fundamentally, it's an opportunity for us to put our best foot forward. I don't want to be reactive. I didn't appreciate being in the circumstance of closing an elementary school in such a short amount of time with limited information that in hindsight, it was hard to trust. Ultimately, it was the right decision. But how we got there was unnecessary. Same thing on the busing fees. So we have an opportunity here with the information and the data to be proactive. And we've done the work to get to this point to know whether or not it's prudent or not. So just sharing my mindset and some of the thoughts that we've gone through and some of the questions I've gotten, I just wanted to share that. So not really questions, but
on your point on the work that's been done by the administration and by the Financial Sustainability Committee, this is a great slide that you put together, the prioritizing financial sustainability slide that has, people need to look at this. I mean, I just was adding up some of these things that I believe to be not just one-time line items. These are ongoing substantial savings. We're talking about over $3 million. There's a lot more on this list. There's a lot that's been cut already. So I don't know that I would have been comfortable feeling like I want to ask the community to support this a year ago. But seeing the work that's been done over the past year to get to where we are and seeing what's projected from here and knowing if we're going to keep cutting from this point, it is going to be affecting student outcomes. And it is going to be affecting student experiences and the programs that we're going to be able to offer. And I'm comfortable asking the community to try to help us not have to do that. So that's my thought process.
I'm sure I had a similar thought process. So as I think about the tax rate, and I've only been sitting up here for a few short weeks, so I don't have any, crystal ball, but just as a parent, I would have some questions that I would need answered. I would first need to know that the why was clear. Like there was actually a basis for needing to take a look at our tax rate. That question's been answered for me this year because I have seen us go through a demography study. I've seen us go through a capacity study. I've seen us go through a property value study. I've seen us go through a compensation study. And I've seen us put together a multi-year financial projection, which I have never seen since I've been coming to board meetings. And I'd like to know that there's actually some tight estimates that are putting this together. And I have seen that at each board meeting. And I have seen you go through departmental expense reviews, which, speak to my accountant heart. So that's one question that has been answered for me. The second one is that I would want that there has been some parent feedback on like sacred cows in the district. I heard prior administration talk about the heart about, a million times. And so that question has also been answered for me because we formed the Financial Sustainability Committee, and I can speak that I was a member of that committee, and the ability to go look and say, where can we raise more money? Where can we cut costs? How can we improve student outcomes with what we have available? So that question has been answered for me. I would also want to know before I adjust the tax rate that you were a good steward of the funds that you already had, that you have exhausted other avenues. And that question has also been answered for me because I have watched you go and look for additional revenue sources. I have watched you be proactive of every grant and related program. And I have an appreciation of what it took to write those grants and apply for all of that money. I have watched that come in. I have watched you look at efficiency metrics to be more efficient with what we have. I have watched you cut and control expenses. And I have looked at you right-sizing our overhead. And I've looked at what you can sell, what you can salvage. So all of those questions that I had as a parent that I've heard from other parents of, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? For me, that question has been answered. I would also want to know that we don't just open the barn door. Like we have all this extra money and what's going to happen with it then. But to me, those projections also say that this is not a silver bullet. We have additional expenses, we have inflation, we have additional costs that we might want to do for the district. And as those costs come in, we're going to have to fund those with additional cuts and additional efficiency measures. And the things that the administration has found this year, we're going to have to continue and maintain in order to meet those numbers. So as I see those questions being answered, I think we're at the point where to evaluate other legally acceptable remedies that we have to fund this district. And to me, we are at the point of having this conversation on DATRE.
Any other comments, guys?
What y'all been saying. I can definitely tell you that in my mind, I want to really honor the work that's been going on this last year as detailed by these three other board members on overturning all the rocks. Now, I think it's time for us to look at other rocks that include improving the revenue side of the house. You know, our sources of funds, we need to keep our legacy going, and I want to honor that work. So I can't add much more to what y'all have added. That's very well said, very well said.
So the way this TRE thing works, the board itself really can't do a lot with the community to advocate for a bond. As freely as we can speak, we've spoken tonight and shared our perspective and our opinions about how and why we should do what we're doing. But the community ultimately is going to have to take task to the ask and determine whether or not increasing taxes and financing this district appropriately is what's right or not, whether or not increasing the compensation to our teachers and augmenting our fund balance is appropriate or not. And there's a lot of ways to go about that, and much will be said certainly around increasing taxes. Some will be philosophical, some will be factual, and some just flat out won't be true. And that's unfortunate, but that's how it rolls. But we've tried to speak and share our perspectives so that we don't leave questions about why and how, where we are and what we've done to get here. But once we determine that we may or may not consider this, the candid conversation around this thing kind of is laid off to the citizens to carry forward. And you can determine what your priorities are. I can tell you what ours are and what they're going to be. It's going to be compensating our teachers and cash flow in this district. And one way or another, that's going to happen. This is the most efficient way we see to accomplish that and to do it as quickly as we possibly can so that we're not in a reactive stance again, like we have been in the past. And so that we can continue to take steps forward and not have to take a step back. And we've tried to overturn every stone in the process. So item 10, if there's no other questions, item 10 will be completed.
Yes.
And we'll move to item 11, which is to consider and act on an order calling a voter-approved tax rate special election from November 8th, 2022.
So on this item, it is the recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees approve the resolution in order calling a voter approval tax rate election.
Yeah, I agree.
With that, I've considered a motion, and the wording needs to be specific.
This right here.
Okay. I move that the property tax rate be increased by the adoption of a tax rate of 1.474600, which is effectively a 13.32% increase in the tax rate, and that the accompanying ordinance be passed and adopted by the Board of Trustees.
The Lovejoy ISD. Huh? Yeah, I've got to read the ordinance. I have to read the whereas statements, correct?
In regard to the tax rate, yes. So we'll need a action item to a vote to order the election and then a vote to approve the tax rate.
I just want to back up and clarify. It says here, the motion, and it says
That is.
I'm sorry.
The tax rate or number one.
All right, I have a
We
motion.
have
Do
to
I have a
make you vote a
second?
lot.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you. So since the tax rate item is the next item, and we got to do that. I know we have to do lots of voting up there. I know. The second recommendation is that the Board of Trustees adopt the tax rate and execute the ordinance setting the tax rate for tax year 2022.
So item 12, consider an act on adopting the tax rate.
Again? Okay.
And make the motion first or read it now?
Make the motion first, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Make
Sorry,
the-
we have to legally do this correctly. So
Yep.
we're making sure we get this correct. All right, so I'll try it again. I move that the property tax rate be increased by the adoption of a tax rate of 1.474600, which is effectively a 13.32% increase in the tax rate, and that the accompanying ordinance be passed and adopted by the Board of Trustees.
The ordinance says, ordinance to set tax rates, whereas the Lovejoy ISD Board of Trustees is charged with the responsibility of providing the necessary maintenance and operation funds to effectively operate the district and the necessary debt service funds to service the district's debts. Therefore, be it ordered that the 2022 tax rate for Lovejoy ISD be set at 0.9746 cents per $100 of value for maintenance and operations and 0.500 cents per $100 of values of debt service, a total combined tax rate of $1 and 0.4746 cents for the total tax rate. Such taxes are to be assessed and collected by the Collin County Tax Office. This tax rate will raise more taxes for maintenance and operations than last year's tax rate. The order would be adopted by the Lovejoy Board of Trustees, and it will list us voting for adoption, voting against adoption, abstaining from the vote. It would be signed by myself and the secretary as of this date. That's the motion and the ordinance. Now I would entertain a second.
Second.
Motion made by Marvin Bobo, second by Amy Smith. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Sure we properly called the voter approved tax rate special election for November 8th. I don't know if that.
Yeah, we're going to go back to that.
Okay.
So we're going to go back to item 10. And so it says, item 11, consider and act on an order calling a voter approved tax rate special election for November 8th. So the motion would be as such, to call the tax election as it's stated there on the agenda. So moved to consider to order a voter approved tax rate special election on November 8th. Marvin Bobo.
Second.
Second, Jason James. All in favor? All right. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Marvin. All right. Item 13, consider and act on approval for purchase of attendance credits for Chapter 49 excess local revenue.
So as we discussed recapture, each year the board is required to approve the purchase of attendance credits, which is the measure by which we pay our recapture back to the state. All districts in the state of Texas have 5 options to pay back that recapture to the state, which include things like detaching property, consolidating with another district, some pretty significant measures. Most districts select option 3, which is the purchase of attendance credits, which is how we pay back the state for that recapture. So we bring this item to you each year for approval. So it is the recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees authorize the purchase of attendance credits to address excess local revenue.
Questions?
It's not really an option, right? We have to do recapture.
That's correct. We can't say no. They don't give us that option.
This is not as fun as it's.
Mhm.
I I move that we do this. Wait, she said.
So moved. Julie McLaughlin. Second, Jeff Wood. All in favor? Opposed? Item 14, consider an act on approval of annual memorandum of understanding with the Collin County Juvenile Services and Juvenile Justice Alternative Education Program.
Thank you. Every year, the board is asked to consider and act on the annual MOU with the Collin County Juvenile Justice Alternative Education Program. As you may know, the JJAEP, as it's better known, enters into these agreements with districts throughout the county. They provide a service for students who engage in behavior that would place them in the JJAEP, typically on a mandatory placement based on the severity of their behaviors, but on a very rare occasion, it could be a discretionary placement as well. So tonight we bring to you the memorandum of understanding for the 22-23 school year for your consideration.
And are there any changes to it substantial to us from last year?
No.
No.
There are none. And one more note, there's a fee schedule on those. We only pay that fee schedule in the event that we place a student there.
As we use it.
That's right. Yes.
And I noticed throughout that MOU, there's several references to McKinney ISD and their superintendent and all that stuff. Does that replace with ours?
They
or-
oversee the
Okay.
JJAP. McKinney ISD does, yes.
Any other questions? If not, entertain the motion.
I move that we consider an act on the approval of the annual memorandum of understanding for the Collin County Juvenile Services and Juvenile Justice Alternative Education Program.
Move that we approve it, right?
Correct.
Marvin Bobo is the second. All in favor? All right. Making sure I'm right. Mine goes from 14 to 16, is that correct? Item 16, consider an act on the approval of an annual memorandum, Collin College and LISD partnership agreement.
Yes, we traditionally have had an agreement with Collin College for our students, our high school students to take dual credit courses. And we offer those in English courses, math courses, social studies, and health sciences. So this is the annual renewal of our memorandum of understanding. So I'm requesting that you approve the agreement between Collin College Community College and Lovejoy Independent School District enter into a partnership to award dual credit. This concurrent enrollment allows students to be enrolled in high school and college at the same time. Dual credit courses are available to concurrently enrolled students and award both high school and college credit for the same classes.
And as we're talking about enhancing our relationships with these third parties, we're not limited to the number of these that we can have, correct?
Correct.
And there's
Yeah.
no exclusivity on our part.
No,
Is there anything significantly different in this agreement than prior?
no,
So our students today can graduate with an associate's degree.
correct.
with Collin County Community College and Lovejoy ISD.
So moved, Jason James. Second, Julie McLaughlin. All in favor? Opposed? Item 17, a presentation on capital for the capital planning update in committee.
Good evening. So we wanted to discuss an item that we have thought about a lot over the past year. But as we were able to work with the Financial Sustainability Committee, we realized a lot of the great work that we're able to do together involves a lot of people and it involves a lot of time. So we are excited this year to begin capital planning and kind of looking at the long-term view of the district's needs and putting together a committee to do that work. So one of the board goals is to evaluate all areas which impact the student experience. And I won't read that entire board goal, but basically looking at all of the things that make Lovejoy a great place to be and maintain our legacy of excellence, it requires capital planning and projects. It may require some facility or technology updates. And what we want to do is kind of take a look back, similarly to what we did with our financial side of the house and some of our strategic planning, and take that lens and look at our long-term capital planning for the district. So what is a capital plan? It's a roadmap to the future of what our school facilities, technology, any other major capital intensive items that we would pay for through the debt service side of our tax rate, and what that might look like. So we would compare where we would like to be, looking at our intended outcomes compared to our current state, and start to plan towards any needs we think we may need in the near future. So you might ask what has been done before. So this is a snapshot of the last two propositions and bond programs. So they're really small, but there is a little bit remaining, and we've done some security and updates and things like that that we've discussed as a whole that were needed. But by and large, it's time to look at our capital plan again. Obviously, things have changed in the last several years since this was approved. And so we need to take another look at what we need in our district. So again, looking at what's happened with our demography, this is some information that SDS provided for us in our enrollment changes year over year. And so obviously that projected increase from our prior demographer didn't hold true. And so some of the things that we need to look at, though, are just because we may not need 5 new schools doesn't mean that our students don't need some things. So we really need to look at what those things could potentially be, and that takes some time. We did do the capacity study last year, and so what that told us is that we were currently functioning pretty well, and we had a little bit of room to grow. So there were no big concerns that we were looking at relative to the capacity within our facilities and our projected enrollment growth. But at the same time, we know we have to start to understand what our current state is from that perspective and what our desired future state is. Our Lovejoy 2030 Strategic Planning Committee did have an operations subcommittee. And it was a great group of people that started some of that work and that conversation around what do we need to have on the operations side of the house to support our students. So we would like to gain more input, assess all of our district-wide needs, and look at any of those future potential items. So this is the breakdown of that Lovejoy 2030 Strategic Planning Committee. And the operations subcommittee was looking at the same products as the rest of the subcommittees in that strategic planning group, looking at future ready skills, strategic targets, strategies, and key indicators, similar to what we shared on the Financial Sustainability Committee side earlier this evening. So this is one of the strategic targets that was generated by the operations subgroup of Lovejoy 2030. So it was, the strategic target was to create and implement a holistic balanced technology plan that fosters learning, accountability, innovation, and personal connection. And there are several strategies listed under that, but essentially wanting to come up with a robust long-term plan around technology was important to the committee. The second strategic target was to fully utilize existing facility space to be more collaborative and efficient for future learning needs. So when I look at what happens in the classroom when I walk by, I'm always super excited because it doesn't really look like it did when I was in school. The things that our teachers do are amazing. And so we have to be able to support that. And sometimes that support is not just additional space, but it's what that space looks like, how we set that up for them. So the operations subcommittee came up with some great ideas about looking at multi-use collaborative spaces. What are innovative classrooms looking like? What should we consider? So that was another part of that subcommittee's strategic target. So we would like to develop a stakeholder-based capital planning committee. It would be an advisory committee of parents, staff, and community members. Similar to some of the work that was done in Lovejoy 2030 or financial sustainability last year, and looking at short-term and long-range goals. So there would be some external resources that we might use in that process. Likely, we would have an update from a demographer and discuss some of those enrollment projections. We might involve an architect on the planning side, looking at any assessment of the facilities if that's necessary. We would also have our financial advisor come in and talk about our debt service strategy. And so this is kind of a mile marker of some of the things that we would like to do. So this is obviously a very early conversation about the capital planning process, but we wanted to get that ahead of you and in your minds before school started, so everybody knows it's coming. But on November 9th, we would plan to send out an application to participate in the capital planning committee. And then we would collect those applications on the 23rd of November. The membership would be presented to the board on December 12th. And then we plan to have 4 monthly meetings between January and April. And then on May 9th, we do have a board workshop. And at that workshop, we'd like to have some feedback for the board from the capital planning committee. So the outcome of that would be probably similar to what you've seen on some of the other items we've discussed this evening. Identification of the needs that we have. We want to address educational adequacy, and that's a big piece of facility planning that often kind of isn't discussed because there's discussion of growth or there's discussion of deferred maintenance. But educational adequacy of our spaces is really important. And also being cognizant of future requirements. While we do have a lot of newer facilities, infrastructure ages quickly. So there are also, we don't want to be surprised by any large infrastructure items that we need to address that we haven't planned for. It helps us with financial forecasting on that side and looking at future options, other funding sources that may be available or phasing. And really, we want to honor the stakeholder voice and get the maximum amount of collaboration we can to have the best outcome. So again, kind of wanted to give y'all just a preview of what's to come on the capital planning side of the house for this year.
Is it safe to say when we're talking about capital planning that this is really talking about the other side of the budget, the INS side? Maybe just take 30 seconds to do what that means versus what we were talking about previously on the M&O side?
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. So we have been talking primarily about when we talked about our tax rate, we had the 50 cents for debt service or INS, and then we had the rest of it for M&O, which is our general fund. Anything that's capital type of work like large technology items, facilities, things like that, get funded out of the debt service side, not the general fund side. So that's a separate area. So we're also doing some things to look at kind of bettering our debt service portfolio, but at the same time, we need to be really aware of what we may need long-term and start planning for that. So anything that would come out of that capital planning would be funded within the 50 cents that's already developed and approved as the debt service side of that tax rate.
Being proactive on both sides of the budget is how we should think about it.
That's correct.
This is maybe not the right time to talk, but I get questions all the time about the property across from the high school, right? So someone asked me just last week, well, why can't we just sell that property and give the teachers a raise from that, right? That really is on the INS side of the budget.
I was going to move a portable over there, but I'm just kidding. That's correct. That's on the INS side of the house. And that really is why we want to do capital planning, right? Is figure out, start to have those conversations.
Right. So
Absolutely.
I'm thrilled about this. I have long been an advocate for this type of planning. It enhances our forecasting out so that we're all going to be aware of when that type of funding is going to need to take place. I love that you're involving the community. And I'd love to be able to see that type of decisioning is reflected in our M&O budget process too. So that as we make expenditures from INS that we are intending to improve our M&O, that all of that is a holistic conversation and budget. So I'm excited about it.
Any other questions?
Agreed. Thank you.
All right.
Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to the work. Item 18, presentation on the School Health Advisory Committee.
Thank you. I wanted to give an update from our first SHAC or School Health Advisory Committee meeting that we held on July 20th. So I'm going to ask Erin Perkins and Stephanie Kranz and Mary Mullen to join me. I think some of the things that you'll hear tonight, some of the things that will be covered are the difference between human sexuality and the health curriculum and the role that the SHAC plays in those two items. I'm not going to steal the thunder from Ms. Kranz or the other two ladies, but they'll go a little bit deeper into that. Another thing I wanted to share with you is that we have developed an avenue for community members to provide feedback. As you know, at SHAC meetings, we're not required to have public comments. But we do want to make sure that we have an opportunity for our community members to provide their feedback, provide their input to our SHAC committee members without going through their personal text messages, without their personal emails. And so when community members provide that feedback through this email address that we've provided to everyone, we put that into a folder and allow our SHAC committee members to have access to that feedback, so they get to read anything that's shared with us. So I do want to pat Stephanie Kranz on the back. She facilitates those meetings. She's done a fantastic job of taking us through the process, starting out from what our purpose is and what responsibility we have as far as being an advisory committee to you, the board. So she's done a great job with that, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you, Mr. Parker, and thank you for the opportunity to update you on kind of the work of our SHAC. And I'm going to extend kind of the thank yous to our curriculum instruction, Erin Perkins and Mary Mullen, because it's really been a collaborative effort with the work that SHAC has to do and what they're tasked. We've got to do some work to help support them in some understandings around curriculum and standards and instructional resources and what their roles and responsibilities are. So just a reminder, what is SHAC? It is our School Health Advisory Council. We're required by law to have it. We're required to have more members that are parents than staff members, and we definitely meet that requirement. We have parents, we have students, and we do have staff members on our council. They serve an advisory role, and really the thought is that SHAC is intended to reflect the local community values, because you can imagine in districts across the state, there's going to be a variety of community values. And so it's really SHAC's role to put their perspective on the components around health curriculum and provide some advisory to the district. So that is kind of what SHAC is. We're required to have 4 meetings a year just in general. And then there's been some new requirements put on SHAC with legislative changes, which I'll kind of go over. One of those changes requires us to have public meetings posted 72 hours in advance. And so those are some of the things we're definitely complying with. So some general information about our July 20th meeting. We had 8 members at our July 20th meeting. The meeting was publicly posted 72 hours prior. When we post that, we post it on the district website, the SHAC component of the district website. It's also physically posted at the Red Building, and it is physically posted at each campus in the district as well. So those postings occur at least 72 hours in advance. The other legal requirement we now have from the state is that agenda and meeting minutes and audio recordings are made available to our public. And so if you go to the School Health Advisory Council component of the Lovejoy ISD website, you'll find our agenda, meeting minutes, and audio recordings. And the audio recordings are new, and just the fact that we're to have them public posted is a new. As best practice, we have historically been posting minutes and agendas, so you'll see them going back several years, but you will also see the meetings and agendas and recordings there now as well. So one of the other components that we were able to complete on our July 20th meeting was we were able to review and approve our goals, our bylaws, which are just kind of how we go about our work. So we set some parameters for just making decisions as a group, and then also our parent liaison for the 2022-2023 school year. So one of the recommendations that comes from the Department of State Health Services, which actually publishes the SHAC guide, is that you have a parent liaison and that you really co-chair the group with a district co-chair and that parent liaison. So we have a parent liaison, and so she's really going to be helping take more of a leadership role on those meetings to help guide our community members and students and staff through the process that we have. So those are just some general information on that meeting. We did set up, as Mr. Parker was mentioning, an email address to capture information and input from community and parents. So I've had some questions about how this is being shared. So really what we do is when the emails come into this email address, we PDF those emails and attachments, and we provide those to our SHAC members through a member resource folder that is shared with them. And so it's in a defined folder that says parent and community emails. So we PDF that so it's just as it comes in, and then we share that folder with them. And as we get them, we're just adding them to that folder. Okay. So as I was talking about, there's been some changes legislatively to what has been asked of the School Health Advisory Council. That occurred with the 87th legislative session, and Senate Bill 9 and House Bill 1525 really prompted some changes to board policy EHAA. And it required you guys to adopt a resolution convening SHAC for the purpose of making recommendations regarding health human sexuality curriculum. It also requires that we hold at least 2 public meetings on human sexuality curriculum materials before adopting recommendations. And it requires that SHAC provide the recommendations to the board at a public meeting. And then it's going to require the board to take action on the adoption of the recommendations by a record vote at a public meeting. So these are all new legislative requirements that occurred with the 87th legislative session. These were not in place before then. Okay. So as you, this is just really a snapshot of our board policy EHAA. So you can see that we've adopted and we have these new processes in place that we are going to be expected to follow. So some other components around human sexuality curriculum that you find embedded in the health education TEKS are that we are required to inform parents of the human sexuality instruction requirements. We are also required to provide written notification to parents of our intent to provide that for school safety and human sexuality. We are going to have to obtain parental consent for instruction in each of the following prevention topics, one of which is the human sexuality instruction, but there are 2 other areas that we have to provide parental consent now, and that's going to be our anti-victimization education, which will include child abuse prevention, sex trafficking prevention, and then our violence prevention, which is going to be domestic violence prevention and dating violence. So what that means is that the district is going to have to provide parents notification that this instruction is occurring, and parents will opt in. So in the past, it was an opt-out. The assumption was everybody's getting it, I'm opting out. Now it's here's what we're doing, and you get to decide as a family whether this is what you want for your family. So it's an opt-in. So no student will receive this instruction without parental permission. Okay. So the other thing that we're required is the curriculum materials for our human sexuality instruction must be posted on the district's website. To the extent possible, when you have copyright laws, you're going to do the best you can to make sure that just having them freely on the website may prove to be difficult, but we would always have those available for parents to look at. And then the other thing is that we're required to provide parents information on the parental involvement in the development of curriculum to be used in human sexuality. Okay. So this was the tentative timeline. On June 20th, you adopted a resolution authorizing the School Health Advisory Council to make recommendations to you regarding human sexuality instruction. And you also recommended approval of our 2022-2023 SHAC members at that meeting. So we had our first public meeting on July 20th. Today we're here doing a public update to you guys just to let us know where we're at in this process. We are slated to have another SHAC public meeting on August 24th, and then an additional SHAC public meeting on September 7th, with the goal of bringing recommendations regarding human sexuality instruction to the Board of Trustees on your September 26th meeting. Okay. So that is looking at our tentative timeline. And these are things that we go over with our SHAC members so that they understand kind of their role and responsibility. You can imagine it's a lot to take on as sometimes a parent, really understanding what the roles are. So really in support of our committee members understanding their role, and when you start talking curriculum, instructional resources, standards, really we invited and asked for collaboration from our curriculum instruction department. And so I'm going to let them share with you kind of what they shared with our SHAC members at that July 20th meeting.
All right. One of the things that we thought was really important for the committee to know before they dug into this important work were some terms that we wanted to build some kind of shared knowledge around. And so I apologize, they're cut off on the slide, but in the gray bar across the top, the first column would be standards. The second column would be curriculum documents, and then last, instructional resources. And so for standards, that is our Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. You'll hear them called TEKS, and some people say TEKS. They mean the same thing. That is what's mandated by the State Board of Education and tells us as educators what our students should know and be able to do. And those are provided to us in kindergarten through 12th grade. Then in the second column are our curriculum documents. So curriculum documents take the standards and clarify them further for the teacher. And typically those documents are created by regional educational service centers like Region 10, TEA sometimes provide those clarifying documents, but frequently district curriculum writing teams create those clarifying documents for teachers to use. An example of one of those documents would be a scope and sequence or a pacing guide. And in just a second, I'll share with you a little bit about what the curriculum writing team does to create those curriculum documents from the standards. And then lastly would be our instructional resources. So those are resources that are suggested to the teacher that are closely aligned to the TEKS. And that's the most important thing we look at when we choose instructional resources for our lessons. And it's important to know that sometimes it takes multiple resources to teach our TEKS. No one resource is going to fully cover and align to the TEKS. So we often have to pull in multiple resources there. An example of resources might be a textbook, it might be a digital resource. Sometimes teachers are provided with exemplar lessons, which is really just an example of how to incorporate research-based strategies into their lesson. It just provides them kind of a model. All right, so and what happened is we had curriculum writing teams in the district. So over the summer, we had teachers here for 2 days, and they did some amazing collaborative work together. And I wanted just to talk through briefly what that process looked like that they went through. The very first thing that the curriculum writing team does is analyze our TEKS. They very deeply analyze what the student is supposed to be able to know and to do by the end of a lesson or the end of a unit. Once they have a clear understanding of that, then they begin to look at how they can group those standards together to form a unit of study. Then those units get paced throughout the year, and that's where we get our scope and sequence, or sometimes it's called a pacing guide. And then lastly, because they have such a deep understanding of what the TEKS are asking the students to do, they then determine how the student will demonstrate their learning. So that is the curriculum process that allows us to create the curriculum documents, right? And then Mary is going to talk to us about creating a lesson. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Mary Mullen. I'm the Director of Secondary Education here in the district. Aaron talked about the what and the why behind our standards. I'm going to talk a bit about the how. And so when we are given the standards, it comes in sort of an outline. So what you see up here is an example on the left of what one of our standards might look like. So this is a 5th grade standard, and you'll see 22 reproductive and sexual health - personal safety limits and boundaries. So that's what's called a category in our standard. So within our knowledge and skills statements, which are our standards, We might have several categories with the same title and then subcategories or what we call student expectations listed underneath. So underneath there where you see the D, that would be considered a student expectation. So if you go back up and you see our category, then we have a statement that's what the student needs to be able to understand, what we want to teach them. In this case, the student understands how to set and respect personal boundaries to reduce the risk of sexual abuse and harassment. So that's what we need them to understand. What we need them to know and do then is covered in the student expectation. Okay, so we have the category, the understanding, and the knowing and the doing. So we'll get, for example, 5th grade health standards. There's 58, I believe, just for 5th grade, where in comparison, in 3rd grade reading language arts, there's 95. So there's a lot of standards that are handed down to us from the state, just to give you a little bit of perspective. So when the teachers take this and try to decide how to present it to the students, the best way, that what activity or what lesson can we create that aligns directly with the standard. So we have total alignment. That's where the true collaboration comes in on our teams. So we look at the verbs first, and here it says they must be able to discuss and explain what the importance of the decision making. So that's how we really tear apart the standards to decide exactly what the lesson will be and to ensure alignment. Here we have an example of what possibly could be a lesson that the teacher presents, and it's a sort of a graphic organizer where the student would identify boundaries. And then after the student identifies boundaries, there'd be a period of time where they would discuss and explain their boundaries and the importance of the boundary. So that would be one example. Another example, this is from the Health 1 standards. And again, you'll see it's the 21st. There are approximately 60 health standards for Health 1. This is just one of 60 again. So we have the, it's all of the knowledge and skills statement. The student understands that there are risks associated with sexual activity and that abstinence from sexual activity is only 100% effective method to avoid risks. So that's what we need the students to be able to understand. And what we need them to be able to do would be identify support from parents and other trusted adults and create strategies, including building peer support to be abstinence or for return to abstinence if sexually active. So the teachers get together and again, try to come up or create a lesson that closely aligns with what the expectation is. And here on the right side is listed possibilities. Teachers with a lot of experience might say, well, I'm going to give these to the students and they can come up with strategies on how to really meet the standard. Or it could be that the teacher has them work in small groups and they come up with their own ideas. So there's a variety of ways the teacher might present it, but that's just an example of what would be aligned to what is expected of the student to achieve.
So when we talk about health curriculum documents, it's much broader than the areas that we've talked about with the human sexuality, the anti-victimization, and the violence prevention. So when we look at from a curriculum department, when we're developing curriculum documents, we're looking at it from a K-12 lens and how that might be taught and delivered. So what what we work on when we develop those, we may see, and health is kind of unique in some ways because it's not all just, it might not align just to a PE teacher. It could align to a guidance lesson with a counselor. It could be a school nurse teaching part of this. So there's just different ways that it could be delivered. So when we do develop these lessons or our scope and sequences, we will be coming forward with some recommendations for the SHAC on where it might best fit for that content that's being taught.
So I know that seems like a lot, but really we felt like it was important to go over these concepts with our SHAC members because really what they're tasked with is really making recommendations to you guys regarding human sexuality instruction that reflects the local community, and it has to comply with the law. And so there are some things, I think there's some thoughts and things I've heard about we don't have to teach health. Well, currently right now, K-8 is, if you call TEA, we are required to teach those standards. And we have adopted a policy where health is a graduation requirement here in Lovejoy ISD. So that high school health is still going to be a requirement here in Lovejoy. And so we do, in order to be in legal compliance as an organization, we have to have those opportunities for students to learn those standards. But where SHAC comes in and what they're being tasked with is they're going to be looking at all of the TEKs that are under the human sexuality instructional component. So not all of the health TEKs. They're looking at this very specific part of the health education TEKs around human sexuality instruction. They do have the ability to determine appropriateness for grade levels. So let's say a TEK is in 4th grade and they say, oh, we don't feel like within our community that's appropriate in 4th grade. They could choose to make a recommendation to have that TEK taught in 5th grade. It still has to be taught within a time period within Lovejoy, but we do have some latitude under those community values to make those recommendations. And then they also have the ability to make recommendations about the when. So maybe they specifically want it taught in the spring of 5th grade. Does that make sense? So kind of looking at age of students. And then they can talk about the how. If they want to make a recommendation that nurses teach this, counselors teach a certain thing. So they're going to, so you can imagine what they're tasked with is they're going to be looking at all of these TEKs and going through them as a council and determining, do we feel like this is appropriate for our community in this grade level? And then what are some specific guidance we want to give around recommendations about the when and how. They could also provide any additional notes that they believe are needed in order to reflect the local community values. So once we've got the TEKs, then really what they can do is they can look at the instructional materials that are available and say, okay, for this grade level that we chose to cover this TEK, we recommend this instructional material as the most aligned. So sometimes what happens with this topic and health, and especially because we have the health adoption, people were moving very quickly to the instructional resources where really when we come back to the standards and what we're wanting students to learn within each grade level, first, let's make those decisions about the appropriateness and how and when, and then we can look at the instructional materials that align to it. So when you get the recommendation for SHAC, it will have each grade level, the standards, and then their notes and recommendations about that. And that's a document we've started, a draft document. That document is available on the Lovejoy ISD SHAC website as a draft, just so people can see what they're working off of. Okay, thank you. Do you have any more questions for any of us?
Just that regardless of what the SHAC recommends or that the board approves, parents are ultimately in the driver's seat with regard to sex health curriculum, correct? Because they need to offer their child.
That's correct.
And I've also heard that statement around health being required for graduation. And so if I'm understanding correctly, we have chosen to place that into one course as part of our scope and sequence. I'm saying the right word. But if we didn't do that, we would still have to teach the health TEKs. We would just embed it in science or PE or some other type of thing. Is that correct? So the TEAC is not something that is optional. It's how we have chosen to structure our graduation program.
It's actually, we got clarification on this from TEA. And so because it's a graduation requirement, we are required to teach the health TEACs for 912, which we do as Health 1. If we as a local community chose not to have health as a graduation requirement, we would not have to teach. Those TEACs would not have to be embedded in other subjects. The K-8 is a requirement, does not change. Okay. Yep. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 3-minute break.
We have something against item 15.
Clear. I know. Oh, I bet.
Labeled.
Yeah, just mislabeled this at 16, so as long as we.
So what do you want me to do?
Okay.
How many are at the top? Jackie, ready? All right, we're going to get back at it. Thank you for the recess. Item 19 is the 2023, 2024 school calendar development presentation.
Yeah, we're already looking towards next year. We're ready to get through 22. No, I'm just joking. As you know, we have not developed a calendar, a school calendar for 23, 24, but we will begin that process immediately. And I just wanted to kind of give you some items on the timeline. So what I'll do over the next couple of weeks is to create and provide variations and options for what the 23, 24 calendar might look like. Once I do that, as you know, Ms. Cordell has a superintendent teacher connection council in that she provides or gets input really from those teachers from the different that are made up from the different campuses throughout the district. I'll bring those options for them to review, those variations for them to review, get their feedback on it, also get some feedback from the community, and then bring a final draft to the board, to the regular board meeting in September for final approval.
Thank you.
You bet.
Item 20 is the library book process and policy.
Thank you. I'm bringing tonight to share some options regarding our instructional materials policy EF local. What I want to bring forward is of splitting this consideration of splitting this policy to two different policies, EFA local and EFB local. And I'm going to think I've got these slides switched the opposite way. So first of all, EFA local, what that would basically do, EFA local would mean that it would separate. Right now, instructional materials is defined as includes library books, textbooks, supplemental resources, electronic resources, etc. So what the option would be is to separate library as materials and instructional materials from that. So that would be the only change to EF local that we would want to have considered. And then going back to EFB local, some options there when we have a resource that a library resource that is challenged, that we would put in place a what we would call an expedited review process. And basically what that would do is that if it was determined that there was the resource had, according to the penal code, anything that would be considered vulgar, obscene, or harmful material, that we could remove that temporarily until the committee has the chance to review it's the library book. So that would get it off the shelf so that students could not access it, and then waiting on the review of the committee, because it can take a while to read, especially some of our more advanced books. It takes a while for the committee to work through that process. So that would be what we would, that's the reason for wanting to split up those two different policies, just because instructional materials, we don't have challenges with that like we would library books. So what the plan is that we would be bringing that forward at the August 29th board meeting to recommend changing our policies to EFB local and EFA local.
Would that also incorporate the ability for a parent to restrict a particular library book from a student from being able to check it out?
It wouldn't necessarily be in the policy, but it could be in our guidelines. So some considerations that we've been discussing is that if there were identified titles that a parent did not want their student to check out, that we could flag those to where the student would not be able to check that out. And also another opportunity for parent input would be able to, we could send weekly reports home to our parents on the books that their children are checking out.
And this is the TASB,
This is the TASB version is what
not the
we,
TE.
not the TEA version, correct. Nothing changed from EF local as far as the board involvement with the new policies that are the options here.
Got it.
So to summarize, state one policy, it's creating two policies, one that deals with instructional materials and one that deals with library
Library
materials.
books. Mhm.
And in the library material policy, we're going to add an expedited review process where the book being challenged will be temporarily moved until the committee can evaluate fully the material.
If it met what is outlined there
Yeah,
with
yeah,
the penal
sure.
code. Mhm.
Thank you. Any other questions? Item 21, board policy FNAA local. Should have stayed.
Okay, what I was wanting to bring forward on this is, let me get to my notes. My apologies. Okay, this is FNAA local, and it's regarding distribution of non-school literature by students. And basically what, looking at our last policy was in 2008, is just really to provide some clarity to our current policy on that. So what the recommendations would be to be considered would, it would just basically it defines and brings more clarity for the example of what is clearly defined as the classroom, the physical location of that, and what would be interpreted with the policy, distribution, defining materials, which is not currently in our local policy. Also, we do not have it separated for elementary and secondary, so it's going to look a little different on how our students, as far as if they were going to distribute any non-school literature, what that would look like. We added some general revisions, and we also removed the prior review by the campus administrator. And part of that is just to kind of maintain where we're not putting biases in there. So again, this is another policy that we'd like to bring forward at the August 29th board meeting for revisions to.
Revised was in 2008.
2008, correct.
So I'm assuming this is going to update for digital distribution and things of that nature.
Yes. Again, it just provides more details in defining what that means.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Item 22, online safety.
Yeah, don't sit down for too long. With the beginning of school, just around the corner, just a few days away, we wanted to, again, inform you just what our practices are as far as online safety, the different layers that we have that we'll be providing students just to keep them safe online. And so Dr. Tinsley, Dr. Duplessis are going to join me, and I believe Dr. Tinsley, you're up first.
So one of the areas that we have been working on since last spring is to shore up some of our digital citizenship resources as far as for instructional purposes. And as you recall, we did some restructuring with the C&I department, and Diana Salak is our instructional technology coordinator. So she's played a major role in this. So we're excited what the resources that we are bringing forward and guidance for our teachers regarding digital citizenship. The instruction that when we look at our scope and sequence and look at what grades are taught in, again, it's driven by the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. We also reference the IST ISE, which stands for the Integrated Society for Technology and Educators. So this is based on 4 core topics that when we look at students' educational experience in Lovejoy regarding technology and digital citizenship, the instruction is age appropriate. So again, when we talk about what grade levels, what time of the year we'll be teaching that. So for example, the first lessons for our K through 4 will just be on basic device care. How do we care for our devices? Where 5 through 12, it's going to be etiquette with emails, just what would be appropriate communication. So we also have, well, we're going to be providing, and we started a little bit of this last year, is that we're going to have parent resources. So if they want to enrich and enhance at home with this, they can check. We can give them access to tips and also some presentations that do align with what's going on in the classroom. The plan as far as implementation, we're doing that right now during Academy Week. So all of our campuses are being trained in the digital citizenship and determining, we're giving campuses a little bit of latitude how they would be teaching these lessons. For example, at the secondary level, you might see some of them during leopard time. And some other ones, you might see it done during the classroom teacher may be providing some of this training as well too. So it's going to be embedded into core classes and also enrichment opportunities for our kids. But we want to ensure that all of our kids receive this. We have scheduled it to where it's about 1 to 2 lessons per grading period. So as you see, it's very kind of concentrated when we talk about bands of grades of how we're going to be instructing.
Wanted to just touch on the reporting and response resources that we have within the district. The first one being our anonymous reporting system. It's through our Vector Solutions. You will see, if you go onto our campuses, you'll see some refreshed posters that were just kind of hot off the press. Mr. Littlefield and his team printed those, or not printed those, got them from the printer and then hung those throughout all of our campuses. What you'll find with this report is the younger grades, they're still very eager to go tell the principal, tell their teachers, tell the counselor, so-and-so did this. As you get older, not so much. And so we want to provide an opportunity for our older students as well, and our younger students, because they have access, but also our parents, to provide them an anonymous opportunity to report any behaviors that they feel are concerning throughout our district. As you can probably imagine, when you get into really 7th and 8th grade and on up, they don't want people to know that they have given information to administration because they don't want that to blow back on them. And so this is a great way. They can text, they can email, they can call, but typically it's through an email or a text. When they do report this, an immediate notification is sent to campus administration based on what campus it's reported from. It's sent to the marshal on that campus, and then it's sent to central administration as well. So, and then we make sure and follow up just to make sure that the investigation is done or what have you, that it's looked into. A couple of monitoring items that we have are Go Guardian and Social Sentinel. They're very similar in nature. Social Sentinel is more of an oversight from the district in when any keywords may be used in online communication between students, we get notifications. And it's pretty sensitive in that if you have students who might even be collaborating between a book that they're reading, and in the book that they're reading, they're giving, they're doing a presentation to the class, but getting in preparation for that presentation to the class, they may use a buzzword or a keyword that Social Sentinel picks up. It sends that notification to us. And then we can either determine, is this serious? Do we need to look into it? Or these two kids are just talking about an assignment and it's harmless. But in any event, we do get notifications. Again, the same people, campus administration, the marshals, and central office also get those notifications. Go Guardian does the same thing, but it also adds a teacher layer to it as well. If if students are logged into the Google Suite and they are visiting sites or have a window open that they shouldn't, teachers can actually go in, send a message to them, please close this window, or they can actually go close the window for them. And so it's a way to monitor student online usage in the classroom. But both of those, again, they work, they're very similar, but they add, again, different layers of oversight and monitoring of student activity online.
So when we're talking about online safety, there's a lot to it, and I'm really glad to see how much the district is doing around instruction and social support for this area. But there are a few things we do on the technology side as well. And we do use Fortinet Firewall, which blocks or filters access to obscene or harmful content. For example, if a student was browsing and seeking some of that information, it would block it. And I think Kevin already kind of gave you some detail on the Go Guardian filter. We're also doing some network upgrades and some basic systems in place that would prevent things that might produce malware or be replicated to multiple computers. So just as an example, there are a number of settings that we've talked about over the past year, but one would be a thing like administrator rights. Some districts may allow any district staff members or students to download whatever programs they would want to on district devices. We don't. As an example, I call Jack when I want to install something on my laptop because I don't want administrator rights on my computer either because it's just too easy sometimes to accidentally download something or not realize, say you're on public Wi-Fi somewhere, that something's being installed on your computer and then it replicates. So we've implemented a number of things on the network security side to try to prevent any of those types of issues from occurring. And of course, the updated acceptable use policy that was mentioned earlier, they've done a lot of great work on. And I think overall, in summary, I would just say that our technology group does an amazing job, and so does the instructional technology side. So it's been a real joy over the last year to see those groups kind of working together along with a lot of the items that are happening on the security side as a whole, and really just augmenting all that work together for student safety.
Thank you. Any questions? All right. Item 23, TASB update 119 and 65.
Right, good evening. So I'll be giving you an update on TASB 119 local and 65 legal policy. So what is TASB policy update local 119, 65 legal? TASB legal policies, they reflect the changing legal context for governance and also management of the district. So what they should do is should inform local decision-making, and they should not be adopted, but only reviewed by the board. As for local policies, they require close attention by both the administration, which is us, and also the board. They also must reflect the practices of the district and the intentions of the board, and they may only be changed by board action via adopting, revising, or repealing. Next. These changes included in the TASB policy update 119 are based almost solely on legislation from the 87th regular legislative session, which was held last year. It's every odd year, so the next one will be 2023. Those details can be found in the provided TASB local policy comparison, which is also in your lengthy agenda for tonight. Next, this will be brought forward formally for consideration at the next regular board meeting, which is August 29th. And then lastly here, we have for you just the policy local action list. It's pretty lengthy. It's also found in your agenda for your review. And that's all. Any questions?
Thank you. Item 24, Bright Arrow communication tool.
Yes, most of you probably got end of July, an email and a text about Bright Arrow. It's our mass communication system. Just want to kind of talk to you about why we switched and some of the advantages there. More than anything, it's effective. We had used it back in last year, back in the spring, with some transportation communication and transportation fees, and we found that it was highly effective. We wanted to work out the functionality of it to make sure that, they seem to promise a lot of things, but we wanted to make sure that all those features did actually work, and we did not need any add-ons. The other thing we wanted to talk about is basically the great thing about Bright Arrow is if a parent changes an email, if they change a phone number, it automatically updates. It works with PowerSchool. So the functionality of the software and with our systems, works well together, and it's an automatic change. Some of the other things that we looked at were just safety and security notifications. For example, we can send an email, a text, and a phone call, and even post on social media immediately, any type of emergency. Very quickly, where as far as the phone call with School Messenger, you'd have to record that. And this automatically does a text to voice with just a click. And Casey and I tried it out, and it sounded really, really, really good when we were practicing with it. So we practiced some of that. We can also send targeted groups. So a classroom teacher can send out an email using Bright Arrow. It's basically a notification system. It's only one way we send it, and it's not two-way communication. It's one-way communication, but we can look at specific targeted groups, athletics, band by the classroom, any of those types of things. So people on the bus, we can create a list and reuse those lists over and over there. So I think another advantage that we looked at is we needed something that would retain student records, because that is a requirement that we have. So any communication that is given to students and parents, it becomes part of their records, and it meets our policy on records retention that we have to keep. And last but not least, one of the best things is it saved us $1 a student. It was cheaper. So the functionality, of course, was great. And hopefully you all opted into that. You would get a phone number. I think it's 87569 that you could opt into. But felt like it was good for us as far as communicating with students, and it'd be communicating with students possibly at the secondary levels only. That's one way. Questions about Bright Arrow? Okay, good to know. Yes.
When does the old
School Messenger, good question.
Is it gone? Or?
It's gone. It ended July 31st.
Okay.
And yes, it is gone.
And so is this going to also replace all the constant contact emails eventually?
Constant contact is different. Constant contact is used mainly because community members can't use Bright Arrow because you have to be enrolled in the district. But constant contact, it's more of an outreach for, the community, cities, that type of thing.
Okay, so that will still.
You will still get, yes, constant contact emails.
This is just replacing School Messenger.
This is just replacing School Messenger, correct.
And are you fairly certain that everybody transferred over successfully? Is there a way to test?
We were trying to test that, and we think so. I have not heard otherwise, because I think that the communication that was sent was pretty much, we might have some parents that didn't opt in, or, when you received it, but we were trying to be really proactive in that. So I think we will know here soon.
But you said it's connected to PowerSchool.
It's connected to PowerSchool, so it would update, yes, unless they didn't opt in, yes, it would update automatically.
We can also emphasize the importance of parents making sure we have an updated
Dated
cell phone
stuff,
number
yeah.
and
And-
email address for them, because if that is not updated in PowerSchool, then of course Bright Arrow won't have it.
Any other questions about Bright Arrow? Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Item 25, DC local employment practices.
Yes, I think Jack's going to get that up for me. This is just something, we're talking a lot about hiring teachers and contractual employees. And we look at DC local, the employment practices part of our policies, in there, it basically states that between March 1st and August 31st, Ms. Cordell has authority to hire teachers. We don't have to send those exactly for board approval, which is great during the summer because we're hiring quickly. We don't need a quorum, all those types of things. However, with the market the way it is, there are times, and we know we have an opening right now that we may need to move on it. I'll tell you, talking with some of my friends in other districts, they're doing open contracts. And basically, if an employee, it's basically, well, we make an offer and they interview the employee, but they're vetted through a system, background checks, fingerprinting, checking references immediately, where it does not have to go for board approval. This is just something to think about there. Sadly, we're losing teachers, and it's troublesome for all of us. I've been in it for 30 years. And so we're trying to put some things, think about some things that we can do to hire people and get them onboarded quickly and through the process. We can do this where it's year round. We can set parameters where it could be where you approve principals, assistant principals, and look at, that go before the board, but anyone below a coordinator or a classroom teacher, that Ms. Cordell could approve there. A lot of times, I think those hirings, I know myself, I interviewed before the winter break and was not brought on board till 1st of February. And so just thinking about some of those types of things, because of course, want to be board approved there. So anyway, something to think about if questions about that, DC local policy.
So the options would be to give her expanded authority to hire folks.
Correct.
year-round.
Yes. And so we could update the policy, change it, you would still have authority. We still would report them like we currently do.
So given the oversight, they're still reported to the board.
Correct.
In the same fashion.
Yes.
And
they're still reported, yes.
I think it's more of a clerical change systematically when these folks come to the board. It's not like we're making a decision necessarily at that time anyway.
Right.
So
We've
the
already gone.
accountability is in the process.
Right.
And so it makes sense.
And, one thing to think about is it takes at least 24 to 48 hours to get fingerprinting. And that is if a person is fingerprinted in the state, and so we do, national background checks, federally background checks. We do our due diligence there and we're required to. So
we want to do everything that we can to recruit
Fruit.
and secure highly effective educators in this
Top
very
talented.
competitive environment, get that top talent in Lovejoy ISD. And we're competing with area districts. And so the ability to be agile and move quickly is becoming increasingly important, particularly as we have a couple open positions moving into the school year. And we know this window is going to close really quickly. So this is just a proactive suggestion for consideration. And just as Ms. Koenig said, we would have the ability, should you all wish to put certain parameters on it as well, to consider that.
I've had some conversation with fellow board peers
Uh-huh.
and they are moving this direction.
Yeah.
Kind of to your point with the music teacher who
Right.
you offered and then within that 24 hours went
We
somewhere
lost 'em.
else. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think several districts are considering this.
I think so too. And I think they're doing it mainly and they're offering open contracts is what we call
What does
that.
that mean, open contract?
Open contract is mean like if we're at a recruiting fair, we have, we've worked with Abernathy before and they have a contract that they would sign basically saying they're committing to us upon background checks, fingerprinting and reference checks. So it's basically telling someone we're making you an offer, but you still have to be vetted through the process.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Item 26, Ms. Cordell. Community engagement opportunities.
Our engaged and supportive community is one of our biggest strengths. And so tonight I want to share with you some additional community engagement opportunities. Part of our culture is a focus on relationships, learning, collaboration, results, and fun. And we know those things do not happen if we are not working in partnership with our parents and our community members. We have some commitments. You all have seen these before. We have a commitment to our legacy of excellence. We want to make sure we honor and build upon those traditions that have made Lovejoy ISD uniquely special. We also feel compelled to make sure our students are future ready upon their graduation from Lovejoy ISD. And of course, we want to have financial sustainability. We talked a lot about that tonight. And again, those things do not happen if we are not working in partnership with our stakeholders. So I want to talk to you about 3 additional community engagement opportunities. Dr. Duplessis did a fabulous job of already talking about number 1, which is that capital planning committee. And I'm going to talk about Leadership Lovejoy, Lovejoy ISD Board Academy, and Silver Leopards Club. The first one being Leadership Lovejoy. Leadership Lovejoy would be designed to provide our community with a comprehensive overview of the school district. They would take a deep dive into the different areas that cabinet up here represents, have some engagement opportunities on our campuses as well with our campus staff and our students. And this could serve as an opportunity for our stakeholders to understand and learn more about our district. And then hopefully we get a very actively engaged volunteer. It may also lead to some interest in future board service as well. But the objective is to make sure our community members, our parents are able to engage as deeply as they would like to with us and make sure that they have the opportunity to have a deep dialogue and have an understanding of the functioning of our school district. The structure for this would be in-person, full day, kind of once a month experiences. And so this takes a certain level of dedication of time. We anticipate there being about 5 or 6 meetings, and we will be launching those dates publicly here very soon. And all of this will be put on our website as well.
Group do you anticipate this being?
We're talking about that as well because it somewhat depends on funding. On Leadership Lovejoy, many school districts, and you'll see sometimes that cities have a similar program. There's typically a charge for this, and so we won't have as tight parameters on the number. But we want that number to be small enough that there can be a really engaging experience. If it's too large of a group, those relationships, those connections can't happen. But we want to get as many people involved and have the opportunity as possible. And then we have Lovejoy ISD Board Academy that will be added. This is a one-time experience, very deep dive into board service. And it is designed for anyone considering the public service of serving on a board of trustees and to learn more about local school governance. And school board members will be part of that, hopefully, and share the experience. We anticipate proposing kind of a panel format so that you all are able to ask questions and share what this role really means in the day-to-day functioning of being a school board member. And then we will also talk about the differences between board oversight, board governance, as well as the role of the superintendent and administration. We will, of course, make sure that our Leadership Lovejoy participants are able to attend a board academy as well. The board academy will be open to stakeholders, community members, parents that are not serving on Leadership Lovejoy, though, as well. And then we have Silver Leopards Club, and this is an opportunity for our senior citizens to be part of our school district. So it will engage our senior community members in the school district in a variety of ways. Of course, they'll get that interaction and that deep dive into the functioning of our school district with the different departments. They will also engage with our campus staff, our students, and get the opportunity to attend special events, performances, and engagements that involve our students. We will have an application up very soon. We actually have a draft of it up there right there. This will be for our senior community members that are age 60 or older, and we're excited about this. We want to create some really dynamic field trip opportunities so that we can engage together and share the great things that are happening in our schools, and then maybe recruit some additional volunteers with anyone that's part of the Silver Leopards Club that wants to get involved on a deeper level. I've had some questions as well about our gold card. The gold card for our senior community members is still in operation. It needs a bit of a refresh and a relaunching so that our community is aware. And we really think as part of our outreach with our Silver Leopards Club, we can get a higher profile for that gold card as well. I think as with a lot of things, unfortunately, with COVID going on, it kind of disrupted normal operations. And one of the unfortunate consequences of that is some of these community engagement opportunities didn't get to be in full effect over a couple of years. And so we're so excited to, launch these things, get that engagement back going, because we know it is good for kids, it's good for our staff, and it's good for our community. What questions do you have?
Sounds great. All right. Item 27.
It's not clicking. Can you help me out, Jack? Awesome. Thank you. Here I have some draft superintendent goals. Annually, I'm required to bring you all goals for your consideration and approval. This is just a draft for your consideration. Hopefully we can bring these forward for a formal approval at our August regular meeting. But if you'll notice on here, the first one is identify and communicate Lovejoy 2030 strategies for initiation in the 22-23 school year. Providing opportunities for stakeholder engagement by implementing Leadership Lovejoy and Board Academy, Silver Leopards, and Capital Planning Committee. Develop capital plan, which includes INS and M&O impact. Increase focus on student outcomes at board meetings and workshops. I believe that was one of the requested outcomes at y'all's last Team of 8 engagement. And then initiate development of partnerships with business, higher education, and or community organizations to benefit students, staff, and the districts. Do you have any feedback or questions?
Just because I'm new, I'm just curious, what would the process be to develop the goals and how you found to decide that these were the right next for this year?
Absolutely. So ongoing conversation through our board meetings and board workshops, right? So identifying what some of the priorities have been. Also, Lovejoy 2030. Many of these things showed up in what our community members were desiring. And then, as I said, with the student outcomes in the board meetings, that was an outcome of the last Team of 8 workshop. Mm-hmm. And the last one was a continuing goal from last year as well.
Academic goals fit into this structure? Is that a separate set of goals, or is that, how does that work?
This would prioritize making sure we're talking about those academic goals more at our board meetings, and where you're going to see that show up is in our district improvement plan and in some of the requirements of HB3. And actually, Dr. Tinsley is working on a presentation. So you'll be hearing more about that in about a month. But that structure is very deeply tied to that district improvement team process and our campus improvement team process. And you all actually approve our district improvement plan, and then we will have periodic updates for you on those goals. That's a great question.
Other questions? Thank you.
And remember, this is something that we can have further discussion about at our Team of 8 workshop as well.
All right. The only announcement I have is that convocation was outstanding today. I hope that the teachers really enjoyed it. It was a great opportunity to engage with all parties that are going to be working with our students, and to see the fun and enthusiasm that was there was amazing. So got to highlight our new teachers and enjoy them as well. So anyway, it was a great day and enjoyed it. So thanks for all the work that went into that. The other is just the emphasis on relationships and fun. We've worked on a lot of stuff that's pretty particular, but those two things continue to grow this year. So I'm looking forward to a fun year. With that, we'd be adjourned.